Hi everybody! Welcome to another story time with Sid. It is me, Sidney of Hightower, as it is every week, and here I am again with the final story, not forever, but of this lovely book right here. Now, it has been quite the journey reading this book, because when I started, I didn't know how long I was gonna go. I didn't know what it would turn into. I didn't know how much I'd fall in love with it, and I didn't know what story I would leave for the end. But I think you're gonna love this one. It's incredibly short. I saved the shortest story for the very end. But it's one that I know that probably a lot of you know. It was one that was actually requested by someone a while ago, and I thought it was a perfect story to leave for last. I will warn you, it is a little sad, so if you're not feeling that today, I understand, but I hope that you will join me for this very special story. Anyway, let's get started for the final story in this lovely old book that is very clearly falling apart. This is The Little Match Girl. It was so horribly cold. It was snowing, and it was beginning to get dark. It was also the last evening of the year, New Year's Eve. In the cold and the dark, a poor little girl was walking along the street, bareheaded and barefoot. Now, it's true that she was wearing slippers when she left home, but what good did that do? The slippers were much too big. Her mother had worn them last. That's how big they were. And the little girl lost them when she dashed across the street as two carriages raced by terribly fast. One slipper was nowhere to be found, and a boy ran off with the other one. He said he could use it as a cradle when he had children of his own. So there walked a little girl with bare feet, bare little feet that were red and blue from the cold. In an old apron, she carried some matches, and a few she held in her hand. No one had bought any from her all day long. No one had given her so much as a little skilling. Hungry and cold, she walked along, looking so miserable, that poor little thing. Snowflakes fell on her long blonde hair that curled so beautifully at the nape of her neck, but she had no thought for such finery. Lights glowed in all the windows, and the street smelled wonderfully of roast goose. It was New Year's Eve, after all. Yes, that's what she was thinking. Over in a niche between two houses, where one jutted out a little farther into the street than the other, that's where she sat down and curled up. She tucked her little feet under her, but she froze even more. She didn't dare go home, because she hadn't sold any matches and didn't have a single skilling. Her father would beat her, and it was cold at home, too. They barely had a roof over their heads, and the wind whistled right through, even though they had stuffed straw and rags into the biggest cracks. Her little hands were almost dead from the cold. Oh, how warm a little match would feel, if only she dared to just take one from the bundle, strike it against the wall and warm her fingers. She pulled one out. Stritch. How it sparked, how it burned! It was a warm, bright flame, like a tiny candle when she cupped her hand around it. What an odd candle! The little girl thought as she was sitting in front of a big cast-iron stove with shiny brass knobs and a brass belly. The fire burned so blissfully and felt so warm. Oh, what was that? The little girl had just stretched out her feet to warm them too when the flame went out. The cast-iron stove vanished. She was sitting with the little stub of the burned-out match in her hand. She struck another. It burned, it glowed, and at the spot where the light touched the wall, it became transparent like a veil. She was looking right into a room where the table was set with dazzling white cloth and fine porcelain. The roast goose was steaming wonderfully, stuffed with prunes and apples. And what was even more amazing, the goose leaped up from the platter and waddled across the floor with a knife and fork in its back. Right over to the poor girl it came. Then the match went out, and she could see nothing but the thick, cold wall. She lit another. Then she was sitting under the loveliest Christmas tree. It was even bigger and more richly decorated than the one she had seen through the glass door of the rich merchant's house at Christmas. 1,000 candles were burning on the green boughs, and colorful pictures, like the ones that adorned the shop windows, looked down at her. The little girl stretched out both hands into the air, and then the match went out. All the Christmas candles rose higher and higher. She saw that they now had become the bright stars. One of them fell, leaving a long, fiery path in the sky. "Someone's dying now," said the little girl, because her old grandmother, the only person who had ever been kind to her, but who is now dead, had told her, "When a star falls, a soul raises up to God." She struck another match against the wall. It lit up everything around her, and in the radiance stood her old grandmother, so bright, so glittering, so gentle, and so blessed. "Grandmother!" cried the child. "Oh, take me with you. I know you'll be gone when the match goes out. Gone just like the warm iron cast stove, the lovely roast goose, and the big heavenly Christmas tree." Quickly, she struck all the other matches in a bundle. She wanted so much to hold on to her grandmother, and the matches burned with such radiance that it was brighter than the light of day. Grandmother had never before looked so beautiful or so grand. She lifted the little girl into her arms, and they flew in radiance and joy, so high, and there was no cold, no hunger, no fear. They were with God. But in the niche of the house, in the cold, early morning, the little girl sat with red cheeks and a smile on her lips, dead, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. The morning of the new year rose up over the little body sitting there, holding all those matches, with one bundle almost completely charred. She tried to warm herself, they said. No one knew what beauty she had seen, or with what radiance she and her old grandmother had passed into the joy of the new year. And that was the little match girl. And that was the last story in this beautiful old book. See what I mean by it's really sad, but it's also incredibly beautiful. It's incredibly beautiful. It's incredibly beautiful because something that could be seen as so tragic is actually, it was the best for her. Sometimes we see death as something so horrible and so scary. But ultimately, when it's time for the right person to go, it can ultimately be peace. And it's a very interesting lesson to learn. Now, I want to thank you all for joining me on this journey that we've embarked over the past few months. I love Storytime with Sid. I love the Tuesdays. It makes me so happy to see you all every week and to know that somehow this little project, or whatever you want to call it, has brought you joy. And that makes me happy. Now, next week, we are going to dive into scary stories, and I am incredibly excited for that. October is my favorite month, as I said in my last video. So, I'm very excited to see you in. Again, this isn't goodbye forever. It's just a closing of a chapter of a book. Anyway, I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I'll see you next time.